Hello, my name is Katherine Young, and I am a poet and translator from Russian. I'm here today with poet Natalya Sukhonos. Both of us have backgrounds in Russian literature, and some of our interests as poets are quite similar. We've been invited by the folks at the Punctured Lines blog to read and respond to one another's new collections of poetry, which I am really excited about. Natalya, your new book is called A Stranger Home, and it's published by Moon Pie Press. It's a wide-ranging collection whose main themes include the mother-daughter connection, memory, grief and loss, and finding home wherever love is. So I'd like to read one of my favorite poems from the book, Night Sky number 16 by Vija Celmins. For fans of Rilke, take a listen for lines from Elegy number 1 at the end of the poem. So this is the poem Night Sky number 16 by Vija Celmins, and the poet is Natalya Sukhonos. I stagger in tears in front of the stars, small white spots on canvas vulcanized with rubber. Moons and skies, deserts and warplanes were crafted by a Latvian artist in LA to conjure my mother's face, the apple red smoothness of her hair. Is blackness mother? Is light entering the canvas like a song, directionless and nowhere? Can pinpricks of light hear my cells expand to a wild dancing grief as stars on canvas recede into the past that still contained you, mother? And even if I cried, you loved watching falling stars, but not with me. Who would hear me? You read to me about asteroid B16, but can you tame a star among the angels' hierarchies, especially if it's your dead mother? Natalya, this is a really remarkable poem. Will you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting me to do this. This is a great honor. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you, and thank you, Punctured Lines blog as well. I wrote this poem when I wandered into a collection at the Mad Brewer of this remarkable artist, Vija Celmins, and it was just these huge abstract paintings of the night sky, different variations of different visions of stars and constellations. And somehow it really, every single painting, but especially that one, affected me really deeply on an emotional level, which is really strange considering that they're so abstract. I mean, literally just, as I said, pinpricks of light, just these tiny white spots on canvas. And so I think what I wanted to explore in this poem is, I guess, the way that grief can work, you know, the way that it can really creep up on you. It can really be triggered by strange works of art that you may never realize, you know, would trigger that kind of grief. But I am referring here to The Little Prince, to, you know, my association with the stars is immediately I go to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and Le Petit Prince, one of my mother's favorite works. And then Rilke, I think I'm invoking Rilke here because he had such a cosmic vision of emotion. And I really wanted to bring in something really vast, you know, like the stars or like the atmosphere or something, or even these abstract canvases in this huge museum, and something really personal, you know, only I will know, only I have that association of my mother with the stars and with the Little Prince. So the macrocosm and the microcosm, I suppose. Thank you.
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that struck me so much about the poem was almost the synesthesia, you know, the multiple planes and realms of sensory and emotional experience, you know, because the light hears, the grief dances, the canvas sings. So it's not just the visual art and the poetry here, it's all of these different sort of art forms all moving together. There were allusions from music and visual art and literature. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, were you conscious of like all of these kind of realms of art and feeling and colliding as you were writing?
A good question. Well, when I studied comparative literature at Harvard, one of the things I learned about is the intentional fallacy and as readers, in the 20th century, people are invited to not always seek out the author's intention, but I think as poets, we want to know what the intention is. And I feel like my readers, you among them, see something much more, infinitely richer than what is there maybe in the poetry, or maybe, that's your interpretation kind of makes it valid. So I don't think I was aware of all of these things. I think maybe as a caveat, I would say that my mother was a person who really enjoyed the sensual realm. She loved making these amazing foods like borscht and a special kind of fried meat. So I think when I refer to the apple red smoothness of her hair, I'm trying to kind of conjure that. She was a very vivid presence. So maybe the fact that I was trying to write about her brought all of these senses together, perhaps. I'm not sure, but I do really enjoy visual art. I sometimes practice it myself, but my sister is a professional artist, and I think it's a big part of my life. So thank you for the question.
That going along that line, when I pulled up the picture of the artwork to look at, I mean, it's in black and white pretty much. There are no other tones that I saw. And yet what struck me was the line about it conjuring up for you, or for the speaker in the poem, the apple red color of the mother's hair. I'm really curious as to, not just in this poem, but in a lot of your poems, you contrast light and darkness, and that contrast is really key. And the role specifically of light, whether it's stars or daylight or whatever, seems to be a really important part of your poetic universe.
Thank you for that observation. I think that's true. I think I probably am influenced by a lot of mystical literature that I've absorbed along the way. Some of my interests include, Borges and St. John of the Cross, and there's a lot of references to light there, even things like the Kabbalah. I guess for me, maybe somewhat stereotypically, light and shadow have a kind of metaphysical resonance and an emotional resonance. There's a pop singer, Florence and the Machine, who says, there's always darkness before the light. So there's a certain idea of, if there is grief, and there has been a lot of grief in my life over my mother's death, are there also pockets of light? Can I conjure her memories in a way that would be, I don't know what the right word is, fruitful or productive or creative? Can that grief give birth, to something else? One of my poems actually is called Pantoum of Grief and Birth. And I view, my children almost as, not necessarily reincarnations of my mother, but as a way to see my mother anew. So I guess I just view, much like Bulgakov, shadow and light, they both have to coexist. And I think that's why they're there so much in my poetry.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Will you read another poem, please, for us?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. I think I'm going to read The Lioness and the Wolf, or Words as Prehistoric Shells. Let me cue myself here. Okay, got it. The Lioness and the Wolf, or Words as Prehistoric Shells. I climb upon the spines of words so I can peek into the chink of sky between red hawthorn leaves, the crevice between autumn and what lies beyond its rearview mirror. In the mirror's front, my daughter climbs the kitchen chair to watch a pot of boiling milk. Small bubbles sputter, fizz, pop like some creature's eyes. The lioness, my mother, will feed me. In the woods she lives, but I don't bother being afraid. Words' spines are smooth as prehistoric shells, wild with a kind of longing for the forest, labile and tragic of primeval undivided speech. The lioness feeds her child thick clumps of morning light, then disappears slowly out of reach. After my mother died, Naomi asked, where did she go? As if death were simply a destination. I wavered, then a blur of questions. Is she sick? Why are you sad? Do you miss her? I said, fairies exist, and so does grandma, but in a realm we cannot see. Sometimes I say she is not there, as if she's changed apartments, gone away. In a well teeming with fish, the sun glides onto their backs. Words huddle, scatter, drown me out. But someone small climbs in my lap and whispers, the lioness, my mother, the wolf father, await me in the forest. Fear no further.
Thank you, Natalya. That's such a lovely poem. I want to talk about spines because the child's words are the spine of this poem. And of course, the whole underlying concept is that the spines are smooth. And that for me is so interesting because I think of spines as, spiny, prickly. And I'm curious as to, where the notion of spines being smooth, I mean, does that have to do with the age that they're prehistoric? I'm interested in where that comes from for you.
Oh, thank you. Well, actually, I cheated here a little bit. This poem is from a poetry workshop. And what we had to do is we had to take our favorite line from someone else's poem and incorporate it into our own. And the line I incorporated is, I climb upon the spines of words, right? And I guess I made it my own in that I did make it smooth. But I think the notion here is, I'm not so interested in spines, but I'm interested in something like the spines of books. They are smooth. They are something that you can just see in the library, but they contain so much more. So the idea is, if you climb onto, or if you observe language initially it might seem like something which it's really not. So I want to look at language here as double-edged, having this, kind of smooth meaning, but then also drowning me out and huddling and scattering and assuming words, assuming a life of their own. So I think only one side of the words of the spines is smooth, the other is prickly, as you said.
That's such a fascinating image. I just love the spines of words. Wow.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of alliteration in the final lines of the poem, father, forest, fear, further. And of course, lots of F, and not just alliteration, but FR combinations. And I'm curious about the role of the forest in this poem, because people often associate the forest with fear. But in this poem, it's a place of refuge and safety and a place for contemplation and connection. And I'm curious about if that notion of the forest as a welcoming place is in any way connected with the notions of prehistoric and primeval that are also part of this poem.
Thank you. Wow, that's such a rich question. I think I was trying to get into the idea of the child's imagination and what that is like. I think when I wrote this poem, my daughter was maybe 3 years old. So now she's 6. So she is extremely verbal and she really loves fairy tales. And so even at that time, she was creating all of these fascinating images. This actually really did happen. I was making some oatmeal with milk and she climbed up and she created this whole fairy tale about the lioness and the wolf. And she gave us these alter egos. And so I think what's so interesting is that it might feel sinister to us and it might feel strange, literally, unheimlich, right? Very strange. But I think for a child or a child's imagination, that's their way of making their reality make sense, right? How do I make this disappearance from my life and from my mother's life? How do I fit it into my framework? Well, I have to create a forest, and maybe the grandma is in a different part of the forest, and maybe she's hiding somewhere, and maybe she will emerge from that forest, someday. So I think the forest is meant to be this, yes, primeval, maybe prehistoric place that is forbidding yet also comforting. So again, we have the opposites, you know, the light and the dark.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a wonderful poem. Thank you, Natalya.
Thank you so much, Kate. This is great. So your new book is called Women Drinking Absinthe, through invoking prehistoric rocks, the sensuality of figs and other fruit, and an herbal recipe to cure mad dogs, among other wonderful and vivid images in the collection. The book explores the strange calculus of love through juxtaposing the amorous encounter with vast scientific phenomena. Beautifully intertextual, Women Drinking Absinthe makes historical forays into Manet's 19th century France and the Confederate US, venturing into the dark themes of gender, power struggles, infidelity, and domestic violence. I would like to read the poem here that most intrigues me, among others. It was actually really hard to choose, and the poem is called Leaving Home. Leaving home, my husband's house, I lose myself, baffled by streets bearing names I no longer know, their curves and contours couched in shadow, each Eden, El Dorado, Elysium, a sign signaling simply exit. Slipping beneath the city's skin, I discover bluegrass, blues, jazz bars, burr of scotch, whiskey with soda. I meet a man, many men, feel fingers flens my face, smell the way flesh melts into midnight in temporary rooms. Recently, I dreamed of home, my husband's back partitioning the bed, unbreached, unbreachable. Here, when it rains, the skylight weeps. The sink gnaws its own enamel. Near the window, an amaryllis arrays itself anxiously. So much need, my husband once said in disbelief. So much needless grief. Thank you so much for this poem. I also noticed a lot of very interesting alliteration this time around. I not only noticed feel fingers flens my face, but also amaryllis arrays itself anxiously, right? All of that was fantastic, and just such interesting images of the urban kind of lifestyle, bluegrass, blues, jazz bars, and the Scotch, different mythical cities. So the urban themes, very interesting. I just have a couple of questions. One is, like I said, there's wonderful alliteration that contributes to the feeling of sensuality. I meet a man, many men, feel fingers flens my face. But the poem also feels like it wants to maintain some distance from its subject, right? Almost like a Edward Hopper painting. That's actually what it reminds me of. I want you to talk a little bit about the way in which losing yourself, which is one thing that's mentioned in this poem, how losing yourself relates to the idea of distance and loss that I sense in this poem.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. And I don't have an answer for that. I think pretty much all the poems in this collection, not just this one, but they're all about trying to deal with, you know, the things we see on reality TV, right? I mean, the things that people have been doing to each other since time immemorial, right? But trying to look at them with a little bit of maybe a distance isn't the quite the word, because it is poetry, but trying to look at them through lenses. The original title of this collection, many iterations back, was Fractals. You know, the notion that something splits off into different possibilities. It all comes from the same place, but splits off into layers, and each, you know, it's a fracturing, right? So this was just one way of looking at you know, the situation set up in the poem, which is leaving is also losing, but it's also beginning. And in the poem, a lot of the beginnings seem not terribly propitious, I guess. But I mean, maybe when you leave anything, you're also finding new things, and that is I think that's sort of a theme through the collection. I'm not sure it's a theme of this poem.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And kind of related to that, of course, the poem is called Leaving Home. I also found that in Succuba, Calculus, and Home Visit, home emerges as something kind of wrought in with conflict and potentially sinister. And I'm not sure that's quite the same way that I'm envisioning home in my collection, but my collection is also called A Stranger Home. So there's a little bit of that. So I was wondering, maybe somewhat selfishly, can you discuss the notion of home as a concept in this collection?
Oh, that's such an well, the contrast is actually what I'm more interested in, because in your collection, it's about, finding home and making home and, making it sort of from scratch. And sort of in my collection, it's sort of the opposite. It's sort of leaving home, this construct, right? That was constructed and that people outgrow, or that requires change, or, and sort of starting over. So it's sort of, they're sort of coming at the same concept from opposite sides, I think. And of course,
Right.
but all of us have, I mean, whether we call it home, it could be a temporary, refuge, right? But all of us are looking for that place wherever we can feel comfortable, if only for a short time. And sometimes that place is a very dangerous place, actually, it turns out to be, which I think some of the temporary homes in my collection feel that way.
Right, exactly. And of course, home is such a relevant concept during the pandemic, where everyone is sheltering, right? That's literally where all of us are. Great. So not to, not to be Pollyannish or anything like that, but I was actually really intrigued by the last three lines, in this collection. Oh, sorry, the Pollyannish comment refers to another poem. There's nothing really Pollyannish here, but I was curious about so much need, my husband once said, in this belief, so much needless grief. So I was wondering if you could comment on those lines and how, how you made that choice of the husband actually making that comment.
Wow. This husband in this poem is not a giving or an accessible person, and yet not completely disconnected either, because maybe it's a husband who's asking for, who feels that the other partner is asking too much or needing too much. And I think it speaks to the fact that all of us have differing levels of commitment, differing levels of need, in any relationship. And sometimes that can doom a relationship when one person needs more, or one person gives more, or, whatever the specific dynamic is. I was actually kind of worried about these lines, because there's a full rhyme, which I don't do very often, at the end of the poem. And I have arguments a lot of times because I translate from Russian poetry with the people that I translate, because much of Russian poetry is still, even today, rhymed and metered, right? And they don't seem to understand that American poetry, some people don't understand that American poetry is not rhymed at all. And if you write, pure rhyme in American poetry, very often you can have it mistaken for light verse. So maybe that was that bias coming in here, but somehow it it ended on that way. And I think maybe the important line or the important word in those two lines is needless. Because if you've got a home, and the home, for whatever reason, is not working out for the people living there, it feels needless. It feels, what a terrible waste, right? This thing that's been built, and it's not working anymore.
Wow, that's really poignant. Thank you so much. Catherine, will you please read another poem from Women Drinking Absinthe?
I will. This one is called Bar at the Folies-Bergère, and I apologize for my French, which is not perfect. It's based on a painting by Manet. And I need to say two things about that. First of all, in Manet's paintings, scholars believe that his use of oranges, some scholars believe that his use of oranges signals prostitution. But what we do know about this particular painting is that the real life woman who worked at the bar would come across the street to Manet's studio and posed during the daytime for the painting. So this is Bar at the Folies-Bergère. It starts with the scent of lavender as she buttons clean pantaloons, laces up stays, smooths her bodice and shakes out the frills, ties the black ribbon about her neck. Her costume smells, as they all do, mingled sweat and makeup, the fabric itself, splashed perhaps with the licorice twist of absinthe. Then come powder and rouge, the small earrings, a pink and white corsage already starting to droop. Her props are placed on view, beer bottles, champagne, a vase containing 2 pale roses, cut glass bowl of oranges that may or may not indicate a certain kind of availability. Leaning against the marble bar, she doesn't look at you. Why should she look at you? Can you give her what she needs, or even cab fare home? Posing, perhaps, or perhaps beyond posing, her face bleak, artificially rosy amid the moon-pale globes and crystals shimmering in the ersatz heaven of the cabaret. Perhaps a man inspects her in the glass. Perhaps he's looking past. Neither of them seems to see the woman on the trapeze, feet squeezed into ankle boots of lizard green. Later, she observes his red gold lashes, watches his still young face slacken in sleep, breathes in his scent of cigars, cheap brandy, scent that clings to her fingers like orange oil as she works her nails beneath the skin, methodically stripping the pith to find whatever's left of the fruit's sweet flesh.
Thank you. Thank you, Katherine. That's beautiful. This is such a rich poem. I love all the descriptions here. It's so visual, which of course makes so much sense given that we're dealing with visual art and Manet, but I can really see, this person getting dressed and all the minute details of her life. I think this is really, really beautiful and fantastic. I was intrigued by the turn in the poem, in the middle of the poem, a turn towards the you. Why should she look at you? Can you give her what she needs, or even cab fare home? Because later on the you isn't mentioned. So I was wondering if you could comment on that stylistic choice of including the you.
I think because this painting, to me anyway, is all about. I mean, it's the way she's at the bar. There's a big mirror behind her, and there is a man in the mirror. So his back is to us, although we don't see him, and we can think that this might be the painter, but it could be somebody else. But it's so much a poem about the act of being observed and mirrored, and seen, and yet not seen, right? Because she's just the barmaid. And so I think you're right. It's breaking the fourth wall or whatever it is. Those lines are reaching out of the poem and asking, you, the person viewing the painting or the person reading this poem, what's your stake in this, and what kind of voyeuristic thing are you doing, right? It's one of my most favorite paintings. It's in the Courtauld Gallery in London.
Oh wow, wonderful.
So beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. That makes so much sense. It kind of reminds me of the importance of the painter interpolating the viewer in Las Meninas, by Velázquez as well. And yeah, there's definitely so much here about observation, who is being observed by whom. That was in fact my next question, because I also noticed that there's a lot about observation and plain angle. And I was wondering, is this a central theme to your entire collection, observation? Who is being observed by whom? Who is able to see and record these lives and these broken homes?
I think very much so. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Thank you.
No, it is very much about, the whole collection is sort of looking at, a couple of relationships or what we might call relationships, but looking at them with all of these different perspectives or lenses, whether it's fairy tales or opera or, and it's not my thing, but you could do it probably from a Keeping Up with the Kardashians, sort of reality. I mean, you could do that too, because the things that people do to each other, the the terrible things as well as the good things.
Right.
Those don't really change throughout the millennia of human beings. We all do terrible things and we all do good things, and it's really just a matter of how you process them, right? Both as the observer, as the actor, and so that in that sense, this book is about maybe even costume play or dressing up, or just trying to find a way into understanding by trying different perspectives.
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think I now see the importance of kind of mathematics and science even more in your poetry, as mathematics becomes a kind of yet another language or another lens through which we can observe, human life. That's great. And so, yes, finally, my last comment, hopefully it's not misplaced, but what I found about the last 3 lines of this poem is that there's something, the poem is very dark, but this poem seems to end on a somewhat hopeful note, right? She's stripping the pith to find whatever's left of the fruit's sweet flesh. And I was wondering if I was reading that into the poem, or if that's intentional, if that's there. Is there, in fact, some optimism at the end?
Oh, I hope so. Although, of course, maybe it depends on how you process Manet's interest in oranges and what that orange actually represents, right?
Right.
But I mean, this poem was a really unusual poem in that I had to write it because of the circumstances in which it was commissioned. I had to write it within about 12 hours and post it to a bunch of people.
Wow.
So it was one of those things that just everything came together. It just came together. It was commissioned for a theater production, and everybody who had a ticket to that production the night before was getting a poem in their inbox the next day. I mean, there were a number of us doing this residency, and so you had to have it in their inbox at 9 the next morning, right? And it just everything. There's like literally not a word that was changed, but the last line I really fiddled with, because I could have put and thought about putting and decided, I hope correctly, against putting whatever's left of life's sweet flesh, because I thought that was smacking you over the head with the hammer, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I like the fruit sweet flesh better, and plus it resonates so beautifully with all the fruit imagery in the rest of the collection.
Yeah. I mean, and I also didn't want to equate, if we were equating oranges with prostitution, I didn't want to equate oranges, prostitution, life. I thought that was just a bridge too far. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much. This is beautiful. For anyone interested in reading more, Katherine's collection is Women Drinking Absinthe, now available from Allen Squire Publishing. You can find out more about Katherine's work as a poet and translator at katherine-young-poet.com.
And Natalya's collection is called A Stranger Home, and it's published by Moon Pie Press. You can find out more about Natalya's work at natalyasukhonos.com. There is more about both of these collections in the Punctured Lines blog, which recently published an interview that Natalya and I conducted with one another about these two collections. Thank you so much to Natalya. Thank you to Punctured Lines for bringing us together. Natalya, it was just terrific to get an introduction to your wonderful new collection. Thank you. And thank you for helping me introduce mine. And thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you so much, Punctured Lines blogs, and everyone watching. Thank you. This is great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.